so excited to make this video today and to talk to you about how to write one of my all-time favorite tropes, which is enemies to lovers. If you're unfamiliar with what enemies to lovers is an extremely popular romance trope where you take two enemies or people who hate each other and make them fall in love. Because social media marketing has become so trope-driven, there have been more and more enemies to lovers romances being published because they are easy to quickly describe. Like if you say it's enemies to lovers in a serial killer's warehouse, people get a pretty good idea right off the bat as to what that story is going to be like. I absolutely love reading enemies to lovers books, and one of the cool things about tropes like this, like enemies to lovers and friends to lovers and other popular romance tropes, is that when you take this trope and you write it, you already kind of have a formula for how the tension and general story is going to play out. So in this video, I'm going to give you the ultimate guide to how to write an enemies to lovers romance. And all of this stuff is information that I learned last year from writing my very first enemies to lovers romance, the stuff that I've paid attention to while reading, the things that I found very helpful, like when I was reading up on how to do this when I was first trying to do this last year, and give you a general idea for how these romances function so that you can apply them to your own story if you also want to write an enemies to lovers book. I'm going to take you through the general structure of an enemies to lovers romance and then talk to you about how to accomplish each of these steps along the way. So the first thing you need when you're writing an enemies to lovers romance is you need two characters who hate each other. They have to be true enemies. Because this trope has become very popular, I see it a lot on social media where people market books as enemies to lovers, but really, you know, they just had like kind of a bad first impression and then they are getting along like really, really well 20 pages into the book. I have found there are usually 3 ways that you can make two characters not like each other. The first one is they don't like each other on a character level. Like their characters just don't get along. Their personalities clash. It's very common for contemporary writers especially to have two characters just start out on the wrong foot. Like they have a really bad first impression or they have been caught up in some sort of misunderstanding that was never cleared up. The reason this is so popular is because you eventually do need your characters to fall in love, and so you don't want to make them irreparably unlikable and make it really impossible for your characters to fall in love, because you kind of need both of them to be likable in their own way, which makes it really hard for them to still be sympathetic when it's a character flaw and like just a clash in how their characters get along. This one's also a little bit trickier because it often falls prey to the other thing that I was just saying, where characters like will start off on the wrong foot and hate each other, and then 20 pages in, they'll clear up their earlier misunderstanding and then realize they actually get along great. You need to be careful because if you have the misunderstanding be something that's very trivial or very weak, the less believable it is that these characters would not like each other because of it. It's not going to be as powerful of a plot driver. Your second option, and this is the one that I personally really like, is you can have them not like each other on a plot level. Give them opposing goals. Like in order for them to both achieve what they want, they have to do it at the expense of the other person. If one of them accomplishes their goal, the other one does not accomplish their goal. This can set them up to be rivals if they are both gunning for the same promotion at work, or they both really want to be school valedictorian. In a fantasy book, you could have two assassins that are setting out to kill each other, and like each of their goals is to kill the other one, and so the plot sets them up to be enemies. It's not because of their personalities, but it's literally because of the outside forces forcing them to be enemies. I really like this one because it's not as simple as just a misunderstanding or getting off on the wrong foot. But the first one can be done really well too. It's, you know, all of this is very dependent on execution. I can think of books that I really loved that illustrate all of these different options. And the third way you can do it is you can set them up to be enemies to lovers because of forces outside of their control. So not necessarily the plot. Like in Romeo and Juliet or West Side Story, you have the warring families, so they're already set up to be on opposing sides. Or I wrote a book where the girl had watched her entire family get murdered by a serial killer, and she had a lot of trauma around serial killers, and the guy had been possessed by a serial killer and forced to kill a bunch of girls that looked exactly like her, and so every time he saw her, it triggered all of that past history and trauma, and like he couldn't even bear to look at her. Those are like situational enemies where they just can't stand each other because of things that happen to them outside of their control. The most important thing is you need to have both of your characters be on opposing sides of something, regardless of what that thing is. These are the dynamics I see the most that I think are the most common, but I encourage you to think outside the box. My personal favorite is when it's really like real enemies to lovers, not just people that had miscommunication and then are enemies, like when they actually want to kill each other. And my favorite flavor of enemies to lovers is like when they actually have like a knife against the throat and you think they actually might use it. You can have assassins trying to kill each other. You can have warring families. You can have people looking for revenge against the other person because that person was involved in the death of one of the family members. As long as you can think of a reason that these two characters would be on opposing sides or hate each other, then you're all set. But you also, I would caution you to be careful. If you're going with the first option and you're making it an incompatibility between their characters, make sure you don't do a giant character switch up like partway through the book. Like you have character A be like a total perfect angel character who is just like very, very likable and very nice. And then you have character B be a total jerk. And then all of a sudden after 50 pages, character B has a total personality switch up and is super nice all of a sudden. That feels very cheap. So you have to make sure that they're both lovable-ish from the beginning, even if they do get off on the wrong foot. If I'm writing incompatible characters, one thing I like to do is give each of my characters a major flaw or a major wound, and then make those two things in direct, conflict with each other. This is something I really started putting into my books this past year. I like to have all of my characters have a big flaw or like a flawed belief about the world or a belief about themselves that gets challenged during the book. And in order for their love story to work out, they have to overcome this flawed idea about themselves and change as a character. And if I can give character A and character B in a romance the like flawed ideologies or flawed beliefs about the world or themselves that are really in conflict with each other, then this sets me up for a very tension-filled romance. I'm writing this cowboy romance right now, and my two characters I tried to set up this way. So character A, Hallie, is a very type A, very organized girl who grew up with a lot of instability and grew up not being able to trust that things would that people would show up for her because she had a very chaotic single mother who loved her and she had a really rich childhood, but her mom wasn't super reliable and her dad was completely out of the picture and never showed up for her. So she becomes deeply resistant to instability, and so she runs a very tight ship of herself. And her flawed belief about the world is that if things are chaotic or unstable or not predictable, that people are gonna leave her and abandon her and she's gonna be alone, and so she needs to keep control over things so she doesn't feel the abandonment and instability that she felt when she was a kid. And then Austin, who's the guy, has kind of the opposite belief. Austin is a bull rider and is a very competitive one, and he was never good enough for his dad's expectations. And so because of that, and because of the deep wound that created in himself, it created this belief that when people expect something of you, they're going to be disappointed. So he rebels against structure and he rebels against anyone expecting him to do anything. He's considered to be the bad boy of bull riding, and because he's always rebelling and getting arrested and doing things that get him in trouble. And so his core belief is at odds with Hallie's core belief, because she believes that if things are unstable, that she's going to be abandoned and the world's going to end. And he believes that if things are too stable and people expect him to be a certain way, they're all of a sudden not going to like him and the world's going to end. And so in order for the two of them to get what they want, they can't both have what they want at the same time. And so that's where the conflict in their relationship occurs. And Hallie really doesn't like how free-spirited, crazy, rule-breaking Austin is, because it undermines her flawed belief about the world. And Austin really doesn't like how uptight Hallie is, because she's expecting things from him and it challenges his belief about the world. And as both of them come to realize that both of their flawed beliefs about the world are wrong, they start to become more endeared to each other, and then they're able to fall in love. So them being able to fall in love is also connected to their character arcs and their character growth. They can't fall in love as the people that they are when they first meet, but they can fall in love as the people that they turn into. So once you have these characters who hate each other and you have figured out how to make their flaws and flawed beliefs about the world oppose each other, you need to make them hate each other more. In real life, if two people really hate each other, they usually don't choose to spend a lot of time together. So what you have to do as the author is create a plot mechanism that puts these two characters in forced proximity. They have to be put in a pressure cooker. If they're assassins, they are assigned to kill each other. If it's two employees at the same company, they are put on the same project. They have to be moved into the same office. You need something situational to force the characters to interact and also to grow, because left to their own devices, let's be honest, humans don't really grow left to their own devices. If you're just allowed to continue on with your flawed ideology about yourself and the world by yourself with nobody ever challenging you or pushing you out of your comfort zone, you're going to stay exactly the same as a person and in life. Many authors will also make their characters rivals, like they're striving to accomplish the same thing. This is popular because it also is able to create some common ground between your two enemies. Like, yes, they're two incompatible people, but they also like the same thing, and they have some common interests and things like that. And if you decide to go with rivals, your characters will always be trying to one-up each other and always be trying to get ahead of the other one during this period. Some ideas for ways you can make characters rivals is like they're both striving to be like class valedictorian, and they're both trying to accomplish that same goal. You can put them on opposing teams, like sports teams if you have some sort of sports romance. You can have them be caught up in like a popularity contest, like in Mean Girls. You need to design the pressure cooker situation to push on the characters' flawed worldview, because you need to create the mechanism that's going to make them realize that their worldview was wrong. So going back to our example of Hallie and Austin, Hallie is a very uptight girl from Boston who goes to watch bull riding in Boston when it comes to TD Garden, and Austin is one of the top ranked bull riders in the world, and he comes and he competes at the Garden. And they have a sort of meet cute type situation, and they like really, really hit it off very quickly, and they end up hooking up that night of the bull riding thing, and then they end up doing something incredibly reckless, which is like they break into TD Garden and they get caught and they both get arrested, and it is a huge scandal because already Austin was kind of like the bad boy of bull riding and like kind of on the fritz of his career. Like his sponsors, like some of them were, wanting to drop him because he was getting into fights and all that kind of stuff. And Hallie absolutely freaks out because she's never been arrested for anything. She can't believe that she's ever done that, and that was the most reckless thing that she's ever done. And Austin's agent proposes, because Austin has now lost all of his sponsors and he's like now seen as being like he's losing a lot of money and he's like his career is in serious jeopardy. The agent decides that one way to rehab Austin's image is to get Hallie and Austin to pretend to date for a contractual amount of time, and then that will help rehab Austin's image to his sponsors, and Hallie will get some sort of compensation, which in this current draft I'm working on, I haven't fully worked out the details of yet. So because they have to pretend to fake date and they have to pretend to like be together, she ends up going back to Montana with him to go and stay at his family ranch, and they both have to pretend to be together in front of his family, so they're both living together in this cabin and they're spending all of their time together even though they've only had one night together up until this point. So the pressure cooker is their forced proximity because they're actually living together, and the mechanism that forces them both to confront their flawed ideology about themselves is that Hallie has all these expectations of him because in order for her to get her reward, they have to convince people that they're fake dating. And so she is very type A and forcing him to act like they're together, and she's expecting him at certain times and she's expecting him to do certain things, and he is crumpling under those expectations, but he can't run away from it because he has to do it because his career is on the line. And Austin is the epitome of instability and and non-commitment. Like Hallie needs things to be predictable, he's not predictable. They both challenge each other's fundamental beliefs, but they also can't get away from each other because they're stuck in this situation together. So you need to make sure that your pressure cooker is designed to push each character's flawed belief as far as you can, because unless they're being pushed on these things, they're not going to realize that they're not actually true. Because through this forced proximity, Hallie realizes, and Austin both realize that the world is not going to end, even though the other person is, expecting things of them or like not always showing up exactly on time for things. So now you have them both in a pressure cooker, and this next section of your book in the pressure cooker is going to be their hatred intensifying. So Hallie and Austin are going to hate each other more because they have to discover each other's serious flaws and they can't get away from them. But after you have the hatred intensify, you need to have some sort of moment of vulnerability to break through that hatred. So while they're in the pressure cooker, this has to build to a moment of shared vulnerability that crashes through their hatred and turns in their relationship into something different. You have to have a moment that tips your characters away from hating each other into the next phase of their relationship. And this moment has to show these two characters that they are not what they thought the other person would be. One of the characters has to crack and get vulnerable, and the other one has to reciprocate and also get vulnerable. One of my favorite examples of this is in Red, White, and Royal Blue. Alex and Henry had been hating each other up until this point in the book, and the two of them together had to go and make an appearance at this hospital. I think they were like volunteering or reading for kids or something. And in the book, Harry, I think, is the Prince of England, and Alex is the son of the President of the United States. They both really, really hate each other. In the hospital, and Henry is reading to the kids, and Alex is like, oh, he's kind of maybe not a monster. Like, he's really cute when he reads to the kids. And then there's this big scare where they think they hear gunshots somewhere in the hospital, and Alex and Henry both have to take cover in a storage closet, and the two of them are like really worried about the gunshots, and they get really real with each other about how worried they are, and they become vulnerable, and they talk about their insecurities and their worries, and they start seeing each other as human beings. And after this point, their relationship is never the same. They're never back to hating each other the way that they were. Once that moment happens, no matter what it is, like if your characters hate each other because of like, you know, who they are as characters, or if because of plot reasons or whatever, after that moment, you enter a new phase of the book and the characters' relationship where you're building closer and closer intimacy. Now is where you're starting to treat this more like a romance. Because the characters are not at each other's throats anymore, they're starting to see each other's humanity. You are building the pieces, like kind of building the tension more and more and more until you're building towards like a kiss or something. The flag posts in an enemies to lovers relationship, like that I like to think of, are like the first period is complete and utter hatred. You build towards this first breakthrough moment of intimacy, and then you build toward like a kiss, and then it drops off because of reasons we'll talk about in a minute, and then you have the happily ever after. So the two big flag posts are like this moment of vulnerability and the kind of first big moment of intimacy. And in this period, you know, you have like the yearning and all of the other like normal kind of romance stuff that's not enemies to lovers specific. But once you have this kiss and this breakthrough level of intimacy, what happens? It's pretty common for tension to die after characters like have a first kiss and profess their feelings for each other, because the like will they won't they tension is really like what makes people turn the pages in a romance. Once the characters get together, it's a little bit harder to do that, but what you can do on an enemies to lovers is it's very unlikely that these characters will just live happily ever after as soon as they kiss, and like because especially if they'd spent this much time hating each other, so you still have a lot of conflict to work with. So what I like to do after they have this moment of intimacy is to go back and dial up the thing that made them enemies in the first place. Whether that's a plot reason, whether that's the situational thing, whether that is a personalities incompatibility. If you go back and you dial that up and make that interact with the fact that they also have just kissed and like also now have feelings for each other, you can have a lot of tension as things kind of start to figure themselves out. Like it's not going to be like kiss happily ever after. It's going to be kiss. They're reminded of why they were enemies. They're reminded of why they hate each other. Things start to dissolve really quickly and things get really weird and horrible. And then they have to change as characters in the climax. And once they change as characters, they're able to have their happily ever after. You want to double down on the version of that character with the flaw right before the climax and happily ever after. Like you want to have them double down into their flawed belief system about the world. Like maybe something happens, like to make them confirm their flawed ideology, and they double down in it, and then their life gets really bad because their relationship can't work, and then they have to learn, like you have to construct the plot and have things happen to make them each learn that by letting go of that flawed ideology, they can go and like be with the person and have their happily ever after. But they cannot have that if they're still the people they were at the beginning of the book. So then you have your climax, and you design your climax around forcing these characters with their flawed ideologies to abandon those ideologies and step into the new versions of themselves. I would illustrate this with more examples from the Hallie and Austin story, but I haven't actually gotten that far yet. I'm still like a third of the way through this draft and I haven't gotten to the end yet. I'm still working on plotting all of it out. I was like a third of the way through this draft, and then I realized that like I hadn't actually thought about it like that with the flawed ideologies because the characters just weren't working for me. So then I scrapped that whole thing and I went back to the drawing board, and now I have these new versions of the characters and I'm just kind of starting to plot and write it. So still early days for this yet, but that is the general structure, and that's how I'm going to be constructing the climax. And once they become these new versions of themselves, they can have their happily ever after. This is where your character makes the choice to let go of that flawed belief system and trust the love interest and fully step into this new version of themselves and be happy in their relationship. This is when the two characters get together and are able to live happily ever after. But your happily ever after will not be satisfying if you haven't set up three-dimensional characters that have these flaws and have overcome these flaws. The purpose of your plot is to create events that push these characters out of their comfort zones. Your plot is the vehicle that changes your character. Your character starts like this and ends like this, and you design your plot very carefully to make sure that they twist and change exactly into this version of themselves. So that is the general structure of an enemies to lovers romance. I am such a sucker for this trope. It appears in so many different places, but I just eat it up every single time. As you can see though, it's not as simple as just having two characters who hate each other, get off on the wrong foot, and then all of a sudden turn into completely different people 20 pages in and then be in love for the rest of the book. There are a lot of different things that you need to think about when you're plotting them in order to make it a rich and emotionally satisfying read. Because if you have your two characters hold on to their flawed ideologies and get together anyway at the end despite these flawed ideologies, it's not going to be a satisfying ending for your readers. Or if your characters don't grow and change in an organic way, like if they just randomly decide one day to let go of the flawed ideology when nothing pushed them to make that choice and pushed them to see why that choice had been harming them, then that's not going to feel earned either. So it's actually quite sophisticated and there are a lot of moving pieces in it, but when you're able to do it well, it is one of the most fun tropes to read, in my humble opinion. So yeah, that is it for my video on how to write a good enemies to lovers romance. I hope that that was helpful to you. If you have a second, I'd be super grateful if you could like this video and also subscribe to my channel. My name is Claire Fraze and I'm an award-winning author who makes weekly videos sharing actionable writing tips that helped me make my own writing better. I am the author of the 5-book paranormal thriller They Stay series, along with The Love Trials, which is book 1 in my new paranormal thriller series, which features an enemies to lovers romance, and that's why I kind of embarked on my journey of learning about enemies to lovers. And I'm also starting to kind of write a couple cowboy romances, but that's still pretty early days right now, but eventually I will have some of those out too. If you have any specific questions, or if you want to bounce ideas off of me or describe what you're working with in your story, or if you're like having an issue with it and you want just my 2 cents on it, leave me a comment down below and I would love to talk to you in the comment section. I really like digging into your stories. I find it really fun. I hope you have a fantastic week, everybody. And as always, happy writing.